r/ProRevenge.
My cousin stole loads of jewelry, so I stole his inheritance. I do not speak lawyer, so please forgive me. Backstory. 25 years ago, my aunt passed away when I was a baby, leaving my two cousins who were both in their early 20s alone to fend for themselves. My grandparents, who were very wealthy, put a clause in their will that grandkids will receive half of their share of inheritance if a parent passes before the children reach age 30, and then the other half when my grandparents eventually passed. Both my cousins received a very sizable inheritance coupled with the money they got from selling my aunt's house. The younger of the two paid off her college loans and was able to buy property. She still lives on the same plot of land. The older sibling blew all of his money. Straight out of a book of the Bible, within 6 years, he was back to living in a condo working as a police officer. Everyone in our small family knew he had a substance issue, so he was barely making ends meet with his officer salary and buying copious amounts of drugs. The next 4 years my cousin went to rehab 3 times, sponsored by my grandparents. He sobered up after getting his girlfriend, now wife, pregnant. Absolutely wretched woman. She saw my grandparents as payday and essentially baby-trapped my cousin, thinking it was her ticket. Within 7 years they had 3 kids, so she is locked in tight. She's a nurse, and with 3 kids around they always needed a little boost. Guess who they would always ask? You got it, my grandparents. Being the kind spirits they are, they always lended a hand. My father, mother, sister and I got sick of it very quickly. My grandmother unfortunately passed away when I was 17, leaving my grandpa as the last remaining. I was undoubtedly my grandfather's favorite among the grandkids, which left a real sore spot in the mouth of my cousin and his wife. I had 2 more years at home before college, so I lived with my grandpa to keep him company and help take care of him. My cousin and his wife hated this, so much so that whenever they came to visit and I was not home, they would send their 3 gremlins into my room to destroy it. My room had double doors, so it couldn't be locked. This was the start. The longer I lived there, the more they would mess with me. My cousin even went as far to place one of those little mechanical noise makers in the cabinet in my room, the ones that play sounds at random intervals that make you think you're insane. Thankfully my German Shepherd would always hear it, and after a week or so she finally found it. They did this to distance me and deter me from taking care of Grandpa so they could swoop in and be the heroes. This continued until one of the kids found my gun. By this time I was 18 and in the possession of a firearm. I use quotations because my grandfather has guns, but cannot aim and shoot them anymore due to arthritis and nerve degeneration, so when I moved in, he placed all the weapons in my hands should the need of self-defense arise. But should he see them out for any reason other than cleaning, there would be hell to raise. Being very well trained with guns and having a sense of pride in defending my home, I took this responsibility very seriously. I always kept a handgun in a locked container in my nightstand with the key on a high shelf out of reach from the gremlins. One fateful day, I am out getting my grandfather food when I come home and my older cousin, his wife and my grandfather are staring at a gun on the table. It was my gun that I kept in the lockbox. It was loaded and had a bullet chambered. I always keep a magazine in the lockbox but never loaded into the gun. The lockbox was nowhere to be seen. My cousin claimed one of the children found the gun and was playing with it. I was 100% certain that he either found the key or broke the lockbox open to get to it and load it, as a 6-year-old would not be able to reach a key I could barely grab, figure out what it was to, load my gun and chamber it. I tried my best to explain what my cousin had said was bullshit and that I never keep my firearms loaded in the house, but my cousin, who is a cop, scolded me on gun safety and threatened to have me arrested if I didn't leave, and hadn't arrested me yet because we're family. I was asked to collect my belongings and go back to my parents. My cousin had one, or so he thought. The next day I apologized to Grandpa and explained to him there was no way one of the kids could have gotten the key. He agreed with me and he apologized, but he thought it best I move out until things cooled down, but once they do I would be welcome back home. Our relationship was a little fractured due to disinformation provided by my cousin. A month later, my grandfather died of a heart attack at 86. I was devastated. I was just beginning to get back into rhythm with him and rebuilding the trust that was somewhat shattered. To this day, I am still unsure of what kind of man he saw me as due to my cousin. Immediately, my cousin and his wife began sucking up to my dad, as they had sealed payday with Grandpa. It was time to move on to the uncle. This persisted for a month or two. I wouldn't stand for it. Then came time for the will. My grandfather's lawyer read out the will to me. My father, mother and sister in our home, our two cousins would be briefed individually on their share of the estate, per my grandparents' requests. Then the miracle line in the will comes to fruition. If anyone attempts to claim any part of the estate that is not assigned to them, they forfeit any assets they are supposed to receive and will be divided equally among the remaining family members. This was basically their way of saying if you try to claim more than you're given, you get nothing. My father is supposed to receive every piece of physical property, aside from 2 or 3 items he set aside for me, from my grandparents as he is the only remaining child. The revenge. I hatched my plan. I called my cousin and told him all of Grandma's jewelry was to be donated to a charity auction. Grandma's collection of gems and metals was extensive to say the least, so a charity event wouldn't care if a few pieces didn't make it right. It was a lure of gargantuan proportions that my greedy bastard of a cousin could not resist. He bit right on it and headed over to my grandparents' house ASAP, determined to snatch up as much as he could. A handful would send his kids to college. Regardless of what I said, the jewelry was never going to go to him anyways, so his actions were purely his own since none of it was destined to be his. Coincidentally, Dad was on his way with the lawyer to my grandparents' house to overlook everything, formality stuff. According to my dad's testimony, my cousin had 3 shoeboxes worth of Grandma and Grandpa's jewelry piled on the kitchen counter ready for loading into his car. My dad and the lawyer stood in the kitchen wondering why it was all there when my cousin walks in from my grandparents' bedroom with a 4th and final shoebox. The jig was up and he put 2 and 2 together that I set him up. Which was true. But there was no penalty against me for exploiting my cousin's greed, so he would fuck himself over. It's worth noting that between the 18 years from my aunt's death and my grandpa's death, their wealth had increased several times over, so my cousin felt cheated and expected to receive just as much as my sister and I, despite receiving half of his already and blowing it. Throughout this whole ordeal, his younger sister, my other cousin, has not had a problem at all and is still weeping over Grandpa's death like the rest of us. However, just like that, my cousin lost enough money in the course of 30 minutes that made him contemplate his sanity. Over greed. My cousin's bitch of a wife apparently filed for divorce a few weeks later. We haven't heard from him in nearly 6 years as he is all but disgraced now. You can call this a fairy tale ending, and on this particular part of the story it somewhat is. There was a massive lawsuit by an unknown family member involving the IRS and FBI later on, but honestly I would rather have my grandparents. Leave comments if you want the other part of the story, but it's not really a revenge story.
A response to the post.
Imagining your cousin walking into the kitchen with that box of jewelry and seeing everyone standing there makes me smile so much. I'm sorry you weren't able to live with your grandfather in his last moments, but it sounds like he knew what was going on. You're lucky to have had such a close relationship with him.
A response to this comment.
That, and I love the thought that if he wasn't so greedy, he could have gotten out of there with a shoebox or 2 full of jewelry before anyone ever arrived. Still a hefty payday, and they would have kept their inheritance. But he just had to keep going back for more and more until he got caught.
A response to the post.
Damn, hook, line and sinker. And your cousin was not a wee bit suspicious after all the shit he pulled with you. Either he is as dumb as a bag of bricks, no offense to the bag of bricks intended, he underestimated you by a huge margin, overestimated himself by a huge margin, or all of the above. Something Dunning and Kruger. Edit, typo.
OP's response to this comment.
Our families lived very close, like all within 10 minutes of one another. With his tunnel vision set on money and the whole family in disarray, I doubt he stopped to think it was a trap. Between the time I told him and the time he got caught was probably less than half an hour. Plus I don't think people who have overdosed twice have much going on anyways. The only other thing I can come up with is he planned on taking stuff anyways without permission and thought it was now or never for him. I think he underestimated me because of how well he played me a few months prior and viewed me as a non-threat, seeing what I said as a haha you're getting nothing taunt and not an actual trap.
A response to the post.
Wow, what an greedy hole your cousin is. Would love to hear the other part.
OP's response to this comment.
So the other part consists of my dad's cousin, the son of my grandfather's brother Joseph, who is the same age as my dad. For decades, my dad, my grandfather, and Joseph ran my grandfather's business in tandem. At the time of my grandfather's death, my dad owned 50% of the business, with my grandpa owning the other 50%. When he passed, the will stated that my dad would receive half of my grandpa's share and Joseph would get the other half, ending with 75% to my dad and 25% to Joseph. Joseph married this Swedish woman whose family was filthy rich, far wealthier than my own family. Joseph wanted to buy out my dad and the company using his wife's fortune. So he did. Joseph tried to pay my dad into an account in my dad's name that was tied to the business, which would be classified as company property once he had 100% ownership, essentially recycling the money back to himself, getting the business for free. It was something along those lines, very similar. Like I said, I don't speak this type of business law. This would have left the entire family dead in the water, as several years ago my grandparents' house was tied into the business as a liquidable asset should the company experience hardship. So the house would have been his and everything inside except for things that were named. My dad was halfway through signing documents when he caught this and called it off, but Joseph tried to take my dad to court since he signed about half the documents. My dad probably would have lost, to be honest, but he claimed fraud on some technicality in the documents and was reinstated and given a double jeopardy type immunity from Joseph. He hired a PI and found out that Joseph had like $20 to his name on all accounts to him and reported him to the IRS, and they believe he has laundered millions out of the US to his wife's family, and the FBI has been on the case for a while. Not so much revenge but a whole bunch of BS where we almost lost a bunch of stuff to a snake in our garden.